Hello friends, this is Gopi. I am a cybersecurity architect and penetration tester. Today we are discussing about the Microsoft Threat Model tool and demo. Using this Microsoft Threat Model tool, how we can execute the threat model to identify the possible threats in the application or product or in the solution. That is the core topic now. Let's start our session now. Okay, agenda, terminologies and definitions, which is related to the threat modeling overview, Microsoft threat modeling tool and demo. This agenda we can see today. Okay, terminologies and definition, HLD, high level design, DFT, data flow diagrams, STRIDE, spoofing, tampering, reputation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privileges. Basically, this is a threat identification and a categorization model from Microsoft. Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool. Threat Modeling Tool from Microsoft. Using this tool, we can execute the threat modeling. Stencils. It is a templates in Microsoft Threat Model Tool to create the data flow diagrams. Okay, threat modeling overview. What is threat model? This is one of the security assessment to identify all possible threats in the logical stage. This is one of the security activity in software development lifecycle. Why need threat model? To identify all possible threats in the earlier stage of the software development. To identify the threats by executing logical assessment. Logical assessment means here no need any source code or runtime system environment. Using architectural details, logically we can execute the assessment. Prerequisite of the threat model. HLD or architecture details of the product or application or solution. Deliverables in the threat model. Threat model report, risk assessment. Current challenges in threat model. Minimal references and sources to execute the threat model. Minimal references and sources to provide proper approaches to execute the threat model and to identify the possible threats in the application or solution. Benefit of the threat model. All possible threats we can identify in the earlier stage. It saves the development cost and timeline from the security bug fix and retest aspect. Okay, if you refer our security reference model, when we come to the architectural and design phase, the threat model we need to consider in this stage. This is our security activities reference model. Last time we saw the pre-sales activities. Suppose if need any further details on the pre-sales, you can refer my earlier video. So today we want to talk about the threat model and it falls under the architectural and design phase. You can see the threat model is mapped here. We can start the threat model in the architectural and design phase. When we want to execute the threat model, the prerequisite is HLD or architectural details is prerequisite. Always we can prefer to execute in the architectural phase. Suppose if the product is already existing product, we can take the existing HLD or architectural details, we can execute the threat model and we can identify all possible threats and open threats in the application or solution. Suppose if need any further details on the reference model, I have given these details in the first training session itself. You can go and refer the first session to get further details on this reference model. Okay, sample application we can take. The application type, web application, backend component, Tomcat, Postgres, and some data analytics. This is the product technical details. The earlier session also we saw these details. Assume that the application is web application type and backend components have Tomcat, Postgres, and some data analytics. Server-side programming language Java, web client AngularJS, HTML, CSS, JSON. Authentication type, it's a centralized authentication, key cloud based authentication is happening. JWT token used for API tokens and number of users 1000 users shall support by the application. Number of users group 4. Data handling, medical data and P2I data is handling by the application. Server OS Linux deployment in the VM, remote services SSH is exposed, security standards or regulatory reference HIPAA FTA. Then the overall project cost 700 FTA. The same technical details we can use, and we can execute the threat model using Microsoft threat modeling tool, and we will identify possible threats in the automated way. That demo we can see now. Okay, let's start to launch the threat modeling tool now. Okay, once you launch this tool, you can get the UI. Here you can see the templates. I will use the default template and load the tool now. So I want to create a new model here. I am clicking this. Okay, once you launch the threat model tool, this is the UI you can get. Here you can see this area. You can create the DFT, data flow diagrams, and here you can see the stencils. We have the generic process stencils, generic external interactor, generic data store, generic data flow, generic trust line boundary, generic trust border boundary. Here you can get these details with the default stencils. Suppose assume that I want to create a small data flow diagram between the web server and web client. So first I need to I will select the web server from here, and I can drag and drop. So this is the web server. Suppose if you go to the property, this is the web server. If you want, you can change the name. Run as, I will select the system. So I selected run as system, isolation level not selected, accept input field, any remote user or entities. Implement the user an authenticated mechanism, I will give yes. Implement the user authorization mechanism, yes. Implement the user communication protocol, yes. Sanitized input, I will give yes. Sanitize output, yes, I will give. This is the properties parameter I configured in the web server. These parameters we can select based on our architecture. Suppose if we don't have the authentication authorization mechanisms, we need to give no. Instead of yes, we need to give no. Then if we don't have sanitize the input, sanitize the output, you can give no. So in our case, assume that we are planning to implement these controls. So that is why I given the yes. Okay, next I will take the browser client. Again, I will drag and drop. Again, you can go to the property. You can set the parameters. Run as. Again, I will give the system. Then the isolation type, I will give not selected. Accept input field, any remote user or entity. I will give the authentication authorization as no. Implement or use protocol, no. Also, I didn't select the sanitizers input, sanitize output. Okay, now we have selected two components. Suppose if you want to make the element size big, you can make it. Okay, next step, we need to create the communication protocol between the server and the client. So you can come to generic data flow. Assume that we are implementing in the HTTP channel. So you can select again, go to property, HTTP. I will give HTTP request. I will select as wire. Transmit XML, I will give no. Contain cookie, yes. SOAP payload, I will give no. REST payload, no. RSS payload, no. JSON payload, yes. I will give JSON payload. Forgery protection, I will give not selected. Okay, go to HTTP response property. I will give HTTP response source authenticated default value. Physical network, I will give again wire. Transmits XML, no. Transmits XML, no. Contain cookie, no. SOAP payload, no. REST API, no. RSS payload, no. JSON payload, yes. Forgery, not selected. Okay, now we have created the web server and web client. The data flow diagrams also we have created. Now next step, we want to identify the possible threads in this diagram in between these two elements. So for that, you can go to view. Now we have two views, design view, analysis view. The design view, we created the data flow diagrams, and the data flow diagrams we have created in the design view. Then you can go to the analysis view so that you can get possible threads in the automated way using this tool. You can click the analysis tool. Now you can see the possible threads here. Okay, based on the given input, we got the 11 possible threads here. Suppose if you want to review each thread, you can click the 11 threads. Here you can see the count, 11 threads displayed, 11 total. Okay. Suppose if you click each thread, it will show more details in the below tab. This is the first thread. Here you can see the status means a review and mitigation status. I will give a need investigation. Then the thread title is replay attack. Then the category based on this thread, this is tampering category. Here the packet or messages without sequence number or timestamp can be captured and replayed in a wide variety of way. This is the thread details here, and the justification if need I will give. Need to investigate I will give. Then the HTTP request priority is high, default I will keep. So I can review each thread and I can give record commands and justifications so that it will save. I can create the report later also. Okay, now we saw how to create the data flow diagrams and connectivity between the elements. Suppose assume that the web server exposing the connectivity and the APIs over the internet. So we need to set the trust boundary. So again you can go to the design view, click the design view, you can get this menu, and here you can select the trusted boundary. I want to select trusted boundary, internet exposed boundary. So you can select the generic trust line boundary, then internet boundary. Again you can drag and drop. Now you can see the trust boundary is created, internet trust boundary. Suppose assume that if you want analysis the threads after connecting the internet trust boundary, again you can go analysis view and you can see these 27 threads are identified. Same elements, same components and the same data flow diagrams. Only we exposed the APIs to the internet. So we introduced the internet trusted boundary. Based on that, the number of possible threads are increased now. So these threads are related to the internet threads. Whenever we are creating the data flow diagrams for analysis, we need to consider the trust boundary also and we need to create accordingly. So each thread manually you can review and you can update your commands. Finally you can create the report also. For that you can go to the report and you can create full report here. Okay, generate a report. You can save the report. Okay, now this is the report. This is the report. You can see it here. So this is the diagram we have created. Then the number of total threads 27. Suppose if you review and the count will vary accordingly. Okay, each thread details here, it is detailed way it is described here. You can see the further analysis using this thread and you can get possible threads here. Okay, now we saw how to create the data flow diagrams, how we need to select the components and connectivity, trusted boundary, and how we need to create the possible threads using the Microsoft thread model tool, and how we need to review each thread. Then finally we saw how to download the report from the Microsoft thread modeling tool. So again we can go to the design view and we can introduce the database authentication server so that we can get the components related threads also. Let's again go to the design view. Based on our application technical details, we are using the key clock based authentication authorization provider. So I will select the generic external interactor for authentication authorization. I will select this component. I will go to the property. I will change key clock server. Then I will give the authentication itself. Type code Microsoft. I will give no. We are not using Microsoft here. Okay, I configured the properties for this component. Then I will select the communication between the web server and the key clock. Okay, again you can create the communication between the key clock server and the web server. Example, assume that our communication is HTTP. So I am selecting the HTTP again. This is HTTP request. This is HTTP response. Again, I will create the trusted boundary here. So in this case, this is mission trust boundary I will create. Since this is server to server communication. Now we introduced a key clock authentication authorization server. Let's see the possible threads for this interface. Again, you can go to the analysis view. Now total 39 threads are identified. Initially it was around 27, right? Now it is identified 39. Again, if you download the report, you can see the threads between the web server and the key clock related threads are identified here. Okay, next the database we can introduce. For that, again you can go to the design view. You can select the database which is required for the system. Example, we can select the database from the generic data store. So I will select SQL database. Again I will drag and drop. Again I will introduce the protocol between the database and the web server. SQL database stores credentials, yes. Log file stores log data, I will say yes. Encrypted, I will say no. Signed, no. Written access, no. Removable storage, yes, we have a removable storage. Then backup, yes, we have the backup and restoration. Shared, yes, I will give shared. Then I will configure the parameters. Okay, now I will set the communication between the database and the web server. For that, you can take the communication. Example, I will take the SMB. Anyway, this is also communicating over the TCP. So SQL communication also always happen the TCP. So I will take this communication, then I will create the data flow diagrams. So I configured the property parameter for SQL communication also. Okay, now we have created the SQL communication. Then we can set the trusted boundary. Again, I will select the mission trusted boundary here also. Suppose if you want to set any property, you can set it here. Otherwise, you can ignore. Now we introduce the SQL database. Now the web clients, they will access the web pages from the web server. They will get authentication and authorization from the key clock server. Once the authentication authorization is done, they can fetch the data from the databases, or they can store and retrieve the data from the web client. So this is the basic flow diagrams in the web application, right? Now I will try to create the report here. Again, you can go to the analysis view. You can give analysis. Now around 65 threads are identified. So these are all the possible threads. Automated way, the tool is providing the list of threads. Each threads you can review and you can import the report and you can analyze it further. Suppose if we want to create the report, again we can go to the report page, create full report, then generate report. I will save this. Now this is the full diagram. Around 65 threads are identified. Each component, what are all the threads are identified. All these aspects you can get the details. We have seen the Microsoft threat modeling demo. It includes how we need to create the data flow diagrams and how we need to analyze the threads, how we need to import the report. All these aspects we have discussed today. This is the sample demo we done. Web client, web server, key clock server for authentication authorization, database. So we created the data flow diagrams and boundary conditions. We analyzed the threads and we imported the threads. Okay, where can we use the Microsoft threat modeling tool? Suppose if we want to execute the threat model in the below mentioned scenario like web application including REST APIs, mobile application, embedded devices, IoT, cloud solutions, network and infrastructure threat modeling. When we want to create any threat modeling in this area, we can use the threat modeling tool and we can create the threat modeling. Once we come to the domain, we can use the banking, fintech, medical, automotive, e-commerce, telecom. So whenever we creating the threat modeling, we can use this tool and we can create the threat modeling. Also the Microsoft threat modeling tool is open source, so we can use this tool further. Okay, next session plan. We done the threat modeling and we identified certain level of threat for this application. So next we need to do the risk assessment. So how we need to create the risk assessment, how we need to identify the security controls, all these aspects we can see in next session. Okay friends, I done this session for the day. I will see you in next session. Bye.